Thank you all this afternoon for joining our first Franchise Well webinar on Is Now the Right Time to Be a Boss, and learn about all the wonderful things the world of franchising has to offer. Our speaker today is Dr. Ben Latalian, and our special guest today is Mr. Robert Crisanti. I'm going to have Dr. Ben Latalian introduce Robert Crisanti and get started. Ben, over to you, please.
Hi, Rena. Thank you for hosting this. It's a great opportunity to share some information about franchising. I know many of you that are participating in this are interested in learning more about franchising. And as we get started, I'm really excited that Robert Crisanti, the CEO of the International Franchise Association, the largest trade association in franchising globally, was able to join us for a few minutes. And Robert is an amazing advocate for franchising, which, as you know, is made up of literally millions of small business owners, hopefully like yourself someday. And as he has his pulse on franchising on a global level, just was great to have him join us for a few minutes and share a little bit about what's going on in franchising globally, and share a few thoughts on your interest in joining franchising.
The vantage point in franchising at the moment is the same as with many other businesses. We are severely impacted in some areas because of the coronavirus. In other areas, we're less impacted. And in yet a third group of areas, we have businesses that are producing at higher rates than they have year over year before. And despite the economic challenges, we have incredible growth there, where people are doing 30% more business than they did a year ago today, in spite of the economic downturn. I think what I think your listeners would be interested in understanding and knowing is that franchising is over 300 different identified SIC codes in the Department of Commerce's coding system. Everything from companies that change oil in cars and tires, all the way to large hotels and motels, to many of the fast food restaurants that come to mind immediately when you use the word franchising. But it is an incredibly diverse industry, including some of the most sophisticated jobs that are out there. Companies that perform lab tests for hospitals that are, you can imagine their level of busyness right now is very high.
Yeah.
And then the folks that the International Franchise Association and the association in the automotive business worked with governors to declare essential businesses and home healthcare businesses that take care of people's mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers that are at home and that need support, either on a lower level or even on a very sophisticated medical level of care. So those are all businesses that are flowing at the moment, and there are some that are producing tremendous amounts of revenues, and then there are others that are completely shut down. And some of the most impacted in that space are things that you would immediately think of, like some of the trampoline parks or climbing parks that you've seen out there, where the governors are just not allowing those businesses to open for some period of time, or they're in the last phase of opening in many locations. But UPS stores are shipping, like mad around the country. So there's a lot of activity, Ben.
Yeah.
So, Robert, this is Rena. If I can chime in and ask a question, as we mentioned, franchisees are really small business owners, and IFA plays a tremendous role. Being part of a franchise brings the power to small business that a one mom and pop business may not have. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of how IFA is able to advocate for franchisees versus being an independent small business?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, we're very, very focused on making sure that government understands that behind these big national brands are local owners, and they know they do the hiring and the firing and the personnel benefits and work with their local communities, and that while they may have a large national brand and a quality standard that is associated with that brand that are sitting outside of their store and the name of that brand and the representation of that brand, they are all, in many cases, not in all cases, but in a high percentage of the cases, locally owned businesses. I say that because in some instances, brands do own and operate some of their own stores and test in those stores, make sure that the products that they produce and services that they produce are going to be inured to the benefit of the franchisees. But there are as many different flavors of franchising as you could possibly imagine out there. It's one of the reasons why you have, so many successful hamburger concepts. How so many successful automotive service concepts. It's because they all provide their own flavor and brand of services. So we talk to legislators about those the economic circumstances, the ability of those companies to do business, and it's now more important than ever because there's a lot of dislocation that's happening with various brands. And we've been operating in an environment, Ben, I think fundamentally of optimally priced resources and supply chain.
Right.
Maybe a very tight labor market that's beginning to come to an end now.
Right.
But I think there's going to be a lot of change in the business, as there was, I think, after 2007, 2008, where you saw an incredible rebound in the franchise business after that. And I was speaking to some folks that were there before that bought some carefully selected brands. And they said that was what has made their financial independence and success what it is today. And so I think we will see that again. But also, I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, downplay that this is a business and it is independently owned and it is extraordinarily risky if you don't do your homework correctly.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've said to people, go to Georgetown University, spend time with Dr. L'Italian, and learn about the various things that you should be considering, and then find a way to match up your interests and with the right brands.
Right. No, well, thank you for that compliment. The Georgetown program I've been teaching for over a decade, and have had any number of folks come through that program to learn about the franchise model and to go about their selection process with a lot more foundation. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's one of the highest rated programs that we have at the IFA, and it is wonderful to have you teaching it there. And it's a wonderful way for people to get their certified franchise executive designation.
Right.
And it is I think it is the must-have to get a good view and make a well-informed decision before you go anywhere else. So thanks for all the work and the over a decade now of what you've had at Georgetown.
Thank you.
Well, Robert, thank you so much. I know you are busy on the Hill and helping out all the franchisees, and you've joined this call today. So I'm going to now hand it over, Ben, to you to continue our conversation and presentation on the franchise industry, how to be your own boss, why to franchise, the advantages, and why now might be a good time to consider a franchise. And then you have some examples, 3 emerging concepts. One of them, of course, being Bid Execs, which where the organization that I belong to, and we're looking forward to hearing all about that from you. Robert, I understand if you need to drop, we would be just fine with that. We appreciate your time.
Thank you much. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. All right. Well, thank you, Rena. I'm excited to dive in here and share some thoughts with you. Let me just start by saying, you see the slide, what in the world is going on? Well, a lot. Even before, dealing with the pandemic, et cetera, our world's been going through a lot of change, and it's driving a lot of people actually to entertain, if not join, in the franchise industry. And so a couple of things that I'll share with you. One is the impact of Amazon, if you will, on actual products that we used to go and buy at a store, like shoes. We now, more summarily, will order them online and have them delivered. Well, that certainly has an impact on retail businesses. But more importantly, it has an impact on the psyche of a consumer. What they're looking for is an experience, not just a transaction. And in franchising, that's where you have a distinct advantage, because each of those franchises is a small business owner who interacts with their neighbors, their community, and their friends, and builds the brand value locally. And so what the world is telling us is that consumers want more experience, not just a transaction. And so when you think about what might be the right franchise for you, you want to think about who you can influence and who you can build an experience for. We also have the growth of the middle class. Ernst & Young has done significant research on this, and by 2030, we're going to have 2 billion new entrants to the global middle class. What does that mean? Middle class has been the stalwart consumer for most franchise brands. And so that segment growing means that franchising will be growing. Again, picking the right concept to take advantage of that is also an important thing. There are brands that are trending off, that the concept's relevance is diminishing. You want to look for brands that are trend on, that are going to intercept these trends that I'm talking about. Another key thing to think about with this growing middle class is that they're not as brand centric, meaning that they're open to engaging with new brands. If you grew up like I did in a house where we used Tide laundry detergent, we didn't ever think about using Cheer. We were totally committed to that brand. And I had friends who their family was totally committed to Cheer. And that's the way a lot of us grew up. We had brands that we associated with as we were growing. And then, we now today at my home still use Tide. Why? Because I grew up trusting that brand. But this new middle class, they're not going to have the same brand centricity that prior generations had, which means that they're open to new concepts, which means that new brands will be able to compete much more effectively than maybe they have been able to in the past. And the last trend I just want to mention here, as you see on the bottom right, this father-son, that we're having a transition. I know that my kids, as they grew up and they went through college and they did what they did, one of them at least came to me and said, I want to own my own business, and I want to be in business for myself, but not by myself. And said, Dad, help me find the right franchise for me. And I did. I helped her and her husband find a franchise. It's a pizza concept called Malawi's Pizza. Every pizza they serve feeds a nutritional meal to a family in the country of Malawi, Africa. You can imagine, as millennials, they were had an affinity towards a brand that had some impact. But the point being is that we have a whole generation that has been successful and is in a position to help their children to become business owners through franchising. So these are all very important trends that are going on in the world that we should be aware of as we think about which franchise would I want to connect with. Change is inevitable, right? This quick quote here from Mark Sanborn is that in order to be successful in life, we have to be able to change. But our ability to change faster than others will be an important component of that. So if you're in a work environment and it doesn't look like that is going to be fulfilling for you going forward, or that job may not even be available going forward, this creates change. And many people, as they come to that realization or they're in that situation, begin to think about, I still have a lot to offer. I still have a lot of value to bring to the market. What brand could I associate with and be my own boss, be my own business owner? And that requires change. It requires change in the way we think, in the way that we approach the business, but it's very important type of change. So franchising, in my opinion, is probably the most misunderstood business model on the planet. But people see franchising represented through Subway, McDonald's, H&R Block, many large national and in some cases global brands. But what is the model really? And so as you begin your journey maybe on into franchising, think about this. Number one, it's a license to a trademark. Meaning the franchisor owns this mark, this brand, like Dunkin', right? Somebody actually owns that brand. And they're willing to give a license to a local person to operate a business under that trademark. This is really important because it increases the resale value of the business. If you look at Ben's Donut Shop, and I work that and I do my very, very best, no matter how long I have it and no matter when I want to sell it, it will never attract as much value in a resale as a Dunkin' Donuts. Franchise brands attract higher resale value. Now, you may think you'll own the business for your whole life. You may want to hand it down to your kids. It may be in for generations. But someday, every franchise business will sell. And it will sell at a higher value than any business like it that's independent. So the license to the trademark is critical. It's also the right to a business model. The franchisor has built a model, and it's really important. If you're going to be a franchisee, you have to be committed to following the business model. So that same example of Dunkin', I can't paint the Dunkin' any color I want. I can't use whatever ingredients I want. I can't cook the donuts any way I want. Yeah, I'm buying the right to follow their model. They've spent time and money and effort to perfect it into a well-oiled machine, if you will, so that it's the most efficient and most effective way. So when you buy a franchise, you're obtaining the rights to follow that model. Said another way, don't go into franchising thinking you're going to be an entrepreneur who is reinventing the model, changing the model. That is very challenging. Doesn't mean you shouldn't share your good ideas with the franchisor, because likely they could be good for the whole system. But you have to understand, you have to follow the franchisor's model. And then the third is that you have this increased ability to learn. Someone in the network is going to come up with a cheaper, faster, better, more efficient way to do almost anything. And their franchisor is going to share that with the system, and that's going to improve the value of yours. It's going to increase your leverage on buying power. If I'm a Dunkin' franchisee, I guarantee you I pay less for the uniforms my employees use than Ben's Donut Shop down the street. Why? Because of our buying power. That's another key advantage of being part of a franchise system. Increase leverage and scale. I also mentioned this earlier, but the higher resale value. This is documented. It's just the fact. The last thing I'll mention here is that owning a franchise, while you have to follow the business model, and it's for a good reason, it increases the value of the business. You ultimately have more control and decision making. And let me tell you where that is. The power that franchisees have, the advantage a franchisee has over the franchisor. The Dunkin' franchisee has distinct advantage over Dunkin', the franchisor, in two key areas. One, local influence. Your ability to interact with your neighbors, your friends, to be involved in things that are important to your community. If you're a member of the SPCA and you're involved in advocating for, animals, right? That influence that you have is also going to be reflected in the fact that you own a business in that community. Your network is really critically important. So when you think about buying a franchise, think about what type of influence you have and where you have it within your, maybe a religious affiliation. That's a network that you have. Maybe it's within the schools, that you're affiliated with or that your children are affiliated with. There's so many ways we are interactive in society. That creates influence. And when you decide to own a franchise, leveraging that influence is critical. You, when you buy a franchise, become the ambassador of that brand. As I mentioned, you're granted a license to the trademark. I tell franchisees all the time, you should be wearing something that has the logo on it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You should even have pajamas. You should be sleeping in something that has the logo on it, because that is really a critical part of what you have purchased. If you're in an elevator and you're not wearing a shirt that has your brand on it, what do you have to talk about with the other people in the elevator? But if you own Dunkin' Donuts and you've got that logo on and you have something to talk about, like, hey, do you know we do delivery? Hey, do you know we do corporate events, etc. So just keep in mind, you have an advantage over the franchisor. They're not going to have that type of influence in your market. You also have the ability to field the A team, right? A franchisor, if they were going to open a company-owned unit in your community, they're going to go run ads and they're going to try and find people. But franchisees have influence in their local community. They know what the local rates are. They know what the local unemployment looks like. They know who to talk to find good team members and to manage an awesome team. You're not being driven by some huge corporation on your hiring practices and your team management. You, as the franchise owner, get to train and manage that team the way that you want it done. You get to offer the benefits you want to offer. You get to interact with them. You have the meetings that you want to have. You have the fun team building things that you want to do. It's your team. And these are two critical areas when you buy a franchise. You're not buying a job. You're owning a business. And your local influence and your local team are critical advantages that you have in doing so. All right, so let's move on, because I know that many maybe have some time constraints, but I'm really excited to share some examples for you. So as we talk about franchising, as Robert said, 300 different categories. My gosh, there's a lot to think about. And so as I was sharing some of the thoughts with you around how to find the right fit, I think it needs to be trend on. I think you need to be looking at concepts that the market is coming to and embracing, that's going to intercept what the market's going to be like over the next 10 years, and not really, how many of you would like to have a blockbuster franchise, right? It's not relevant anymore. And so when you're looking at franchise concepts, make sure you think about the relevancy of that concept, because most franchise agreements are 10 years long, or maybe 5 years with renewal options. These are long-term investments and commitments. So make sure that you're looking for a concept that is really going to be relevant over the next 5 to 10 years. So let's take a quick look at 3 emerging concepts in the market today, just as an example of some that I think are interesting. Let's start with Fit 20. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but this is a concept that was started in the Netherlands. And these are strength training studios, 900 to 1,200 square feet. So you're talking about a very modest rent cost. I think, $3,000 or less total occupancy cost. So it's a very affordable type location. It has 6 pieces of equipment, a small waiting area, and it's one-on-one or one-on-two personal training sessions for 20 minutes once a week. And it's based off of very strong scientific evidence. The type of training that's conducted is very intensive, but can be done by anyone from 12 to 92. As a matter of fact, this particular concept, their demographic of their customers is 35 and older, and their average is around 50 years old. Well, we have an aging population in the U.S., and increasingly that aging population is not going to go pound weights at the local gym. Matter of fact, given what's going on in the world with pandemic and virus, I think it's even less likely that your large-based gym concepts are going to be as relevant as they were in the past. Anyway, this is a subscription model. Members buy a monthly membership, pay a monthly flat fee, and come once a week for 20 minutes. Everything is recorded and monitored on a proprietary application that shows people how they're improving week to week. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity in franchising in the health and wellness area. And I think it's very trend on. It's a low employment model. One personal trainer can handle up to 100 members. So you're only talking 4 or 5 employees, even at scale. So anyway, something you probably haven't heard about, but boutique training and fitness, you're going to be hearing more and more about. And here's one example. All right, let's move on now to bid execs. This, again, is another exciting concept and very trend on. Matter of fact, this is the first and only franchise concept in the multi-trillion-dollar contracting space. I mean, as many of you probably know, the government awards $1 trillion or more of contracts every year, and they have a penchant towards granting those to SMEs, small, medium, enterprises. The problem is many of small, medium enterprise, which could be service disabled veterans, minority owned, women owned, etc., really struggle with effectively going through the bidding process. Well, bid execs rest upon a global business that's already operating and has been operating for a decade that can provide a full menu of services. This franchise starts with a very small office and can start with no staff, just the initial franchisee, going into the market and beginning to build relationships with companies that want to effectively compete for contracts. Now, these don't have to be government contracts, although there are a huge number, but these could be contracts for education services. Every university in the country and community college goes through this contracting process, and hospitals, etc. So there are lots of sectors, 11, that are supported by this business model. The franchisee is developing these relationships and then relying on the existing infrastructure to provide the services until you're able to build your own staff in your local market. So it's a way to leverage into the business, and it's scalable to an unlimited size depending on the market demand. So you could start by yourself, but end up with 100 plus employees, in a multi-million-dollar business over time. I'm really excited about this because it is a new entrance into the franchise arena, but it's serving a community that has been around for decades and is literally untouched in franchising. So, Rena, I know that you sponsored this because you're excited about entering into the franchise market and bringing this concept to the market. I don't know if you want to share a couple of thoughts about why, after running a successful contract management and proposal management business for a decade, you decided this was the right time to start franchising.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Ben. Really, it is, where we, as you mentioned, we have, as a company, been supporting government contractors, commercial contractors, shipyards, for over a decade. I've been in the industry for 25 years. The whole proposal management, bid management industry has been around for over 50 years. So this is not a new industry, but what nobody has done is created a concept to leverage the experience and knowledge of local folks and bring those to companies who want to do business with the government, with the shipping yards, with the large commercial companies who put out bids. The only access that SMEs have is to hire independent consultants. The challenge for independent consultants is they cannot scale. And what we bring is the ability for them to scale their business to a huge operation without the overheads and the fixed cost that might come with some other business. So yeah, we're very excited about this, and we look forward to in the near future talking more about how Bid Execs works, and hopefully getting your support in moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting to see a very successful entrepreneur like yourself make your concept available to qualifying folks. So great. All right, well, let's look at a third concept now, just to give you some variety. I'd like to, expose you to Celebri School. This is a child and daycare provider, early childhood education. Some of the brands that you may be familiar with that are in the market today: Primrose, Goddard, they've been very successful. Well, when you look at the demographics of our country over the next decade and the demand for high quality early childhood education, it's outstripping the market. And so this is a really exciting development because the founder of Celebri Schools has been operating in the greater Baltimore area the last 26 years. He owns and operates 25 existing locations in that market, and they're very successful. You can see average gross revenues of one of these of 1.6 million, average EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, 422,000. He has a very proven curriculum, and again, like Rena, operating a very successful business and now choosing to make it available through franchising. So as I mentioned, he's in the greater Baltimore area with a very strong concentration, but what he's looking for, of course, is to make that available in other places. So this is what franchising does. You have an entrepreneur who builds a successful model, then using franchising makes that model available to people in their local community. Now, this is a different level of opportunity than the other two that I mentioned, simply because of the startup cost. When you think about investing $634,000 to $1.4 million, that big spread has to do with the facility, of course, and how expensive it is and how large it is and how it's built out. So this is not for the faint of heart, but there are many that are able to use what's called ROBS, which is Rollover Business Startup. It's a government program that allows you to use 401k, IRAs, or other long-term investment funds and invest in your own business. So something you might want to take a look at if you're going to think about something that has this type of investment level. So basically, what are we talking about? These are just three very quick examples of what I believe are compelling and exciting trend-on opportunities to become your own boss. Now, having shown you these three, hopefully it gets your mind thinking. But make no mistake, there are hundreds more out there. Now, maybe not as many that are new to the market, but franchising is exciting. There's no one size fits all. What you want to do, as Robert said, is research. Start looking at what's out there and see where it is you think you might have the most influence in your market, where you could build the best team, and where you're going to personally be rewarded. Nothing worse than being in a business or a job, for that matter, where you're not fulfilled, where you don't feel like you're making a difference, where you don't feel like you have control. So are you ready to be the boss? Are you ready to take advantage of the opportunities? I believe the market conditions are ripe for many to join in the franchise industry, to make that decision, to take control of their future, and to pick a concept and invest in it and really be successful for themselves, not for their employer. Strategically choosing the right concept is critical. It can be tremendously rewarding, but if you're led astray into a concept that is not the right fit, it is a very unpleasant situation. I'm talking to you as an educator today. I do not broker franchises. In the market today, there are many who present themselves as educators, but really they're simply getting a commission from the franchisor that you choose to buy. So while they can be helpful, I want you to be cautious and make sure you understand whether they're being rewarded for getting you to buy a particular franchise, or if you're really given good information that is to your benefit. Just keep that in mind. I want you to go on this education for your franchise journey starting today and continue it until you find the right fit so you can make a good decision. One last thing I would say is plan to succeed over time. While you might know somebody who's very successful, they'll probably be the first one to tell you it doesn't happen overnight. I've been in franchising 30 years. I've built and sold 4 franchise companies. I ran ExxonMobil's franchising for the U.S. I have looked thousands of franchisees in the eye, and I can tell you that those that go in with their eyes wide open and commit their time and their efforts to following the system and the model have been successful. But it doesn't happen typically in the first 30 days. It doesn't happen many times in the first year, but I assure you that when done properly, you can be very, very successful and rewarded within 24 to 30 months of going into franchising.
But Ben, while we look at questions coming in, if there are any, from a franchisor standpoint, what you mentioned in the last slide, go with your eyes wide open. It really truly makes sense for both parties, not just for the franchisee, but for the franchisor also, because we look to work with business partners. Our franchisees become our business partners in a way.
Absolutely.
And it's important that we pick and have a long-term relationship with the right folks. What advice would you share in terms of evaluating the franchisor? What should franchisees look for other than you like the concept or you like the service that they offer, but what else should they align themselves with?
Right. No, great question. Thank you. Yeah, I think first of all, I appreciate you saying that franchisors need to look closely at their candidates. Just because a franchisor will sell you a franchise isn't a good reason to buy that franchise. Meaning, when you think you have an interest in a concept, you should pay close attention to how the franchisor evaluates your application. Meaning, do they even ask you to fill out an application? How much time do they take to actually get to know you and try to determine, are you a good fit for their system? In fact, I could tell you, in many cases, the more they try to, talk you out of buying it, the more likely it is you'll be successful if you choose to do it. Again, when you're dealing with a broker, they can think of all the reasons you should be a franchisee and maybe not some that you shouldn't. So just keep that in mind. How does the franchisor evaluate candidates? Because if they will let people into the system that aren't a good fit, it will drag down the value of the brand over time, and that will affect you as well. Now, a few things I would tell you when you're evaluating franchise concepts. For example, when you're looking at multiple franchisors in the same sector, like let's say you were looking at Celebrity schools and two other different concepts in that same space. A couple of things that I would do. Number one, I would definitely talk with as many existing franchisees as I can. Certainly, that will give you insight as to how they feel treated by the franchisor, how well the business model performs, etc. They are at liberty to share with you anything that they want about that relationship, and that can be very valuable. Another thing that I would recommend is that as you fill out the application and receive what's called the franchise disclosure document, this is a fairly large document that the federal government requires a franchisor to provide to a qualified applicant. I would encourage you to print that out. Now, maybe 100, 200 pages long, but I would encourage you to print that out, get out a red pen or a magic marker, a highlighter, and read through it, every word from beginning to end. It's incredibly valuable to understand what you're agreeing to and what you're getting involved with. What is the business model that is being presented? I think that's very important. And then the last thing I would say is, what is the franchise training model that this concept is presenting? If you're going into a new business venture, in many cases, you're going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. Wow, trying to learn as much as possible, as fast as possible. And so what kind of training program have they put in place to underpin getting you up to speed and with the capability to be effective? You don't want to be, handicapped, if you will, coming out of the box and underperforming. You want to be able to come out of the box with your business and perform at a very high level. So that's going to rely on a very robust training program. So those are a few of my thoughts. I see a question here. How long does it take in order to become a franchisee? That's a great question. I don't see this as a very quick process. Matter of fact, from the time a candidate finds a concept that they have interest in and begins to engage with the franchisor to complete an application, to get a franchise disclosure document, to have conversations, this can take 30 to 60, sometimes even 90 days, especially if there's a discovery day option. Discovery day is where the franchisor invites candidates to come and to meet the team and see if there's a physical studio or school to actually see it. Those can also be very helpful. But I would tell you that the courting process, both for the franchisor to qualify and really evaluate candidates, and for candidates to really evaluate and understand the offer, can be 60 to 90 days. And that's just if you've found one that you're very interested in and you're going down one path. Many times candidates will find two or three and go down that path with those simultaneously. So anyway, think about investing significant time to make a great decision.
Well, I do want to jump on that here to say that while the candidate might take 60, 90, or even a few months longer to evaluate a franchise business to consider, it is important to know that the same franchisor, such as us, we spent 10 years perfecting it. So
Right.
relatively speaking, a few months is not such a bad thing for you to spend in understanding what business you're going to align yourself with. So great points. Ben, I want to be respectful of the time. We had scheduled 30 minutes for this. We have gone over by 15 minutes already. A lot of good information here. Do you have any closing remarks before we end our webinar?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate anytime I have a chance to provide education on franchising. I hope that each of you will consider yourselves now students of franchising, and that you will, begin your journey thinking about some of these things that we've covered and looking into some concepts and seeing, is this the right time, for you to be the boss? And I wish you well.
Thank you so much. We have shared Ben's contact information here on this slide. We will make this recording available as well. So if you need to go back and refer to it, you will have access. We will send it out, email it out to all participants. Thank you so much for your time today. And I know Robert is no longer on the call, but please thank you to him as well. We'll pass that on.
Thank you, Rena.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.